This podcast is brought to you by Knowledge at Wharton. For more information, please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu.
As part of the presidential election, one of the questions being asked is, who would be the best leader for this country? Many people have come back, in some respects, neither Donald Trump nor Hillary Clinton. So what makes a great leader? There are qualities they should definitely have, and probably some qualities they probably should not. Jim Sisco is founder and president of risk advisory firm Inodo Global. He also spent 23 years in the military with the Marine Corps and the Navy, retiring as a lieutenant commander. And Jim joins us on the show right now. Jim, welcome.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Great to have you on the show. Obviously, leadership is a massive topic within this presidential debate. In terms of your time in the military and now working in the private sector, what are the things that you like to see in a leader?
Well, that's a great question. I look at leadership through a lens or a prism that really has four attributes. There's a lot of qualities and characteristics that make a great leader, but if you distill it down, you look at four attributes that really most great leaders possess. And the first one is moral courage. The second, integrity, and third, discipline, and lastly, faith. And, as we continue our conversation, we can look at how these different attributes are applied to individuals and either whether or not they possess those attributes and traits or whether they don't, and then how it affects them as leaders.
I don't know if you'd like to make a comment on the two main candidates in this, but do either one have those types of leadership skills that you would like to see in a leader for the country? Well,
I don't know either of the candidates personally, so it's really difficult to make an objective assessment. However, from how I view successful leaders through the prism of those attributes, and I look at the individuals and I look at what they whether or not they possess some of these attributes, it's really difficult from an objective perspective to make that kind of assessment. Okay. I can easily talk about other individuals and leaders that either possess those qualities or don't possess those qualities. Sure. So it really is difficult, and especially with the skew that the media paints on the different individuals, it's really difficult to get a good sense of that.
Well, when you look back at your military career, I'm sure that there were people that you came across that you viewed as just great leaders, correct?
Yes, there were individuals that I worked with that I thought were great leaders that possessed those characteristics, but also, in the military, I've come across people who were not those great leaders. And one of the things that's interesting from a perspective of being in the private sector and being in the military is civilians tend to adore our generals and our admirals. They put them on pedestals. Right. And some of them are really outstanding leaders. Others are terrible, to be honest with you. I've worked with general officers and flag officers that were no smarter than you and I, that didn't possess any of those attributes or qualities or traits that would make them successful leaders. And, a lot of times and what we're seeing in the military today is that a lot of these generals and admirals are politicized. Once you become an 06 and you get ready to pin on, your flag, your general or your admiral rank, you become a politician and you forget really what the leadership is all about. And that really is depressing for me to see a lot of that happening.
Well, I guess it's interesting, and maybe partly because of the kind of the media society that we live in, and obviously more available content out there. If you think about it, there have been certain generals General Schwarzkopf, General Powell, General Petraeus, just thinking of three off the top of my head, that all have become almost celebrities with what they have done. Now, obviously, I think if you look at that group, there have been times where those generals have done phenomenal work, but they've become celebrities. So, I guess to a degree, that may detract a little bit from it.
Yeah, yes and no. And here's why I say that. I really have a strong admiration for General General Colin Powell.
Yep.
And if you look at his career and look what he's done in his career, and then you look at him post-career, he never wavered. He remained very steadfast in his convictions, in the way he approached things, and he didn't compromise his integrity. He didn't compromise his beliefs. And to this day, he still does a great job of that. When you look at General Petraeus, it's a totally different story. Okay. There's an individual who a lot of people don't, know, and if you look at it from like an historian perspective and understand the man, he was politicized from when he was at West Point. He married the commandant's daughter, and basically his career was politicized from the beginning.
Right.
So if you look at where he ended up, and if you look at how his career ended, it's not surprising to see that. And we, as civilians, and you look at the media, give him a lot of credit for things that really he did not achieve. Right. Like writing the counterinsurgency manual. I mean, he did not write the counterinsurgency manual. He had a bunch of staff officers sitting around writing it, and then he signed his name to it, and obviously then he becomes the author of that. Or winning the war in Iraq. People say that the troop surge was the thing that won the war in Iraq. It turned the tide. But anybody who was served in Iraq and understands, the Sunni awakening and the bombing of, pretty much the bloodletting that was happening from the Sunnis and the Shiites, it really was a culmination of events that turned the tide of the war. And it wasn't the troop surge, and it wasn't him being a brilliant tactician. And then you saw how he took the same plan to Afghanistan, and it failed. And nobody really wants to talk about that. So totally different individuals, totally different experiences. And what I would say is Colin Powell is a great leader. General Petraeus, not so much.
Well, if you take the work that you have to do in the battlefield out of play, how closely is a strong military leader to, say, a gentleman that would be a president or CEO of a company? I'm sure there are correlations. There's obviously differences, but I would think there's some correlations as well.
Yes, there are. I was actually talking with my chief financial officer who went to Wharton, and he's always trying to bring me back to the business side of things when I looked at it through the military lens. And it's funny that you mentioned that because, I said, for me, there's no similarities between being a CEO of a company and then being a military leader on the battlefield. Outside the battlefield, yes. Right. But when you have lives in your hands and you're making a wrong decision, it could be be responsible for the death of somebody. That it's a totally different. It's totally different. Now, everyday operations and some of the things that happen through my experiences, working with employees and something goes wrong, and I look at them and they expect me to be mad, and I say, it's okay, nobody's dying. And it's a different perspective for them because the stress that they face in their jobs, I would say, is not the equivalent of the stress that you would face in the military, either in a combat situation or not so much in combat situations. But those stress levels are different. The decisions are different, and the way you approach them are different.
Jim Sisco joins us, founder and president of risk advisory firm Inoto Global. He also spent 23 years in the military with the Marine Corps and the Navy, reaching the rank of lieutenant commander. Your comments are welcome at 844-WHARTON, 844-942-7866. We're talking about leadership and how important it is in today's society, both in the political realm, but also in the private sector as well. Again, 844-942-7866. Or if you cannot get to your phone, you can send us a comment via Twitter, either at BizRadio, B-I-Z Radio 111, or my Twitter account, which is at Dan Loney, Loney 21. If you look back at history, I would think that very many presidents have to have an unbelievable level of leadership. And there are probably a couple that you probably have picked out over time that you think are probably maybe at the top of the list in terms of being leaders and being leaders of our country.
Yeah, I'm not a historian by trade or nature, but I do conserve a lot of reading. And some of the individuals that struck me as great presidents and leaders, Abraham Lincoln, he epitomizes all the characteristics that I mentioned. Theodore Roosevelt is another individual. Looking across the pond, as we would say, Churchill was an incredible leader.
Yeah.
Margaret Thatcher for her time. So I'm not looking at just U.S. presidents. I'm just trying to categorize into great leaders. And then even on the private sector side, if you want to pull a couple leaders and contemporary leaders, if you look at Elon Musk and what he's doing, you would have to say that he possesses some of the characteristics and traits of a great leader.
What is it?
What
is it about him specifically that you really have latched onto?
I would say his vision. One of the it's not a characteristic that I talk about. Moral courage, integrity, discipline, or faith, but being a good leader, you have to have vision, and then you have to be able to motivate your people to see that vision and to follow you. And whether right or wrong, he does have a great vision, and he's able to motivate individuals and people to follow him.
I would think that also you can really get a gauge of the strength of a leader when a company is going through struggles. And obviously, we've seen a variety of these types of situations in the last several years. In the wake of the recession, obviously, maybe the most recent incident of not being a great leader is Wells Fargo. And again, not commenting specifically on individual cases, but when a leader is trying to lead a company out of trouble, out of a bad situation, that I would think is an area where you can really focus on how good of a leader a person really is.
It's interesting you bring that up, and I'm gonna say that the Wells Fargo is a great case study of failure of leadership. And if you understand what happened within Wells Fargo, it really was the culture of the organization. And as a leader, you need to understand the culture within your organization. And if you say that you don't understand the culture within your organization and you're not responsible for what was happening,
right,
that's a failure, a leadership failure. So I think it's a great example of how people don't have the moral courage to do what's right. They know that the culture within the organization is not optimal, or I don't know how to say it the best way, but and they choose not to do what was right. And another example I'll throw out there that was, if you talk about how things are being politicized these days. If you look at, and if you really dig down into what happened with the FBI director, James Comey, and you look at how his role was very politicized, and
sure,
if you look at the investigation and what's going on,
yeah,
did he possess the moral courage to do what was right? Did he make the right decisions from a legal perspective? And from what we're hearing from inside the FBI, a lot of people are questioning how he handled that. And once again, if you go back to and apply the traits and characteristics, you'll see that these good leaders don't subjugate themselves or subordinate themselves or their beliefs or their integrity to the pressures and the societal pressures that are growing every day with media. But they don't do that. They choose to remain steadfast and stay with their moral compass.
Well, and a lot of people might even put Eric Holder, former head of the Justice Department, in that realm as well. But I'll throw it to the other side of showing great leadership. I think if you go back a few years, look at General Motors and what Mary Barra has done with that company in the wake of the ignition switch recall. And maybe to a degree, the auto industry itself is has kind of this wall around it where it doesn't, get that big hit like a lot of other businesses would. But still, Mary Barra, to be able to come in there and clean up that mess and kind of own it, having been a lifelong member of that company, it does say a lot about her as a leader.
I would agree. I don't know much about her or the auto industry,
yeah.
But I would have to agree with you. When you can, in the face of adversity, come up with solutions and then apply those solutions and stick to them, that's a great attribute. So on the political side, Bush too gets a lot of he gets a bad rap, but one of the things that I admire about him after 9/11, he really believed in what he thought was right. He took a position, he took a stance, and he, based upon his principles of freedom, justice, American values, and he chose to move forward.
Right.
Whether right or wrong, we can argue that all day, but he did take a stance, and he executed his plan, and that is one of the things that I admire in him. We can debate all day whether it was good decisions or bad decisions, things like that. But given the stress that he was under, he made a decision and he followed through with his decision.
Well, how important in terms of being a leader does it also require you to have not only good people below you, but the belief that they will do the correct job below you? It's funny because I went through in preparing for this. I went through your company list of people at the top end of the firm, and obviously, as you mentioned, your CEO is a Wharton grad. Which, by the way, you can't ever go wrong with having a Wharton grad as your CFO. But your COO has military background as well. So there, I think there's a little bit of a correlation there that the people below you, you have to have trust in them and belief that they will be able to do the job as well.
Yeah, that's a huge part of a successful organization. I tell everyone in the organization, I don't need yes men around me. I know I'm smart. I don't need 10 people telling me I'm smart. I need people who are willing to challenge me intellectually, willing to challenge me based upon my decisions, and not say, Jim, you're the best. That was a great idea. I say this as kind of jokingly. In the military these days, you as a flag officer, you walk outside and you have your 4 aides around you, and you say, it looks like rain, and there couldn't be a cloud in the sky.
Right.
But yet you have 4 aides running to get umbrellas. And I was always the heretic. I was the guy who said, sir, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you smoking crack today? Because there's not a cloud in the sky. And when everybody says we want out-of-the-box thinkers, we want people to challenge us, they don't. What they really want is they want yes men surrounding them. So when you look at, looking from a historical perspective of, great leaders, and you look at Abraham Lincoln, and if you've read the book Team of Rivals, I think it is, you'll see that he assembled people in his staff and his cabinets that were in opposition to him. The people who would challenge him, the people who didn't get along, who created environments that were not always harmonious, and that's good. Friction is good within organizations, and if you can't raise your voice and yell and come to disagreement and find solutions, then I think a very effective organization.
You mentioned Teddy Roosevelt before, and obviously I think a lot of people understand that in terms of if you're putting up a hierarchy of great presidents and great leaders, Teddy Roosevelt is up there. When you think about what he did, in the military, what he did, in government in and around New York City, this is a gentleman that has been well respected for many, many years and continues to be to this day.
Yeah, I was not, like I said, I stumbled upon him through a speech. As a matter of fact, it was really funny. I was trying to find a speech I was giving because I was a best man at a wedding. And I was trying to find something that epitomized the individual who, was getting married. And I don't think that a lot of people are familiar with it, but Teddy Roosevelt gave a speech, and it was called The Critic. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read, and I've memorized a lot of it, but I'd like to read just the beginning of it, because I think it really is powerful, and it talks a lot about this conversation. It's easy to be the critic and point out people's flaws, but it's really not the critic who counts. And I'll just go on by saying, it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So that in his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And really, that's for me something that I've always has motivated me in a way and provided me the drive that I need. That I'm never going to be the critic. It's easy to point your finger, and two things that I always say: when you point your finger, remember there's three coming back at you.
Right.
And then the other thing is, my grandfather really instilled some great values in me, and one of the values that I believe is important for a leader is humility. And my grandfather used to say, that and a quarter will get you on the bus. And I'll put it into context. I came back from, I won the Commandant's Trophy, which is the highest national award for officer candidate school. And I come back and show him this trophy. I'm like, hey, Grandpa, look, I won the Commandant's Trophy. And he would say, that and a quarter will get you on the bus, but you better have a quarter. So people who look back in their careers and look what I've accomplished, there's a shortcoming there. I look at myself and I say I haven't achieved anything in my life. And people are like, oh my God, you've gotten this and this and this. And I say, well, that's really no big deal. I mean, I have to look at what I want to achieve and what I know to achieve. And so this is really interesting when you look at people and presidents and leaders. How many of those leaders have those attributes or qualities?
Well, how many of sorry for cutting you. How much do you believe that, in some respects, good leaders can have a little bit of a generational component to them? Like you mentioned, what you learned from your grandfather, obviously what you learned from people in the military. But having other generations kind of teach you may very well help it, and it may be an issue as to why we at times do have a lack of leadership in this country.
That's a great point. I mean, the lessons I learned were over the course of, 49 years, 48 years, and some of those were really hard lessons. And if you look at, and I read an article the other day looking at the leaders of companies, in the old days, when we talk old days, it took 75 years for a company to become a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company. The rate for Fortune 100 and 500 companies today is less than 10 years for some companies. And if you look at the leadership within those organizations, I have a great idea and I'm going to build an app, and, I'm a college kid who went to business school and, I come up with a good idea and now I move forward. So here I am at 29 years old or 30 years old, and I'm a CEO of a business. Have you really learned the life lessons?
Sure. That
somebody who's, 50 years old, who spent, half of their life in the military, who's been 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. So they're different. I'm not saying I'm better or they're better or worse. There's a lot of things that I, as a leader, learn from those individuals. But I think there is a void or a gap in some of those things that make great leaders, and especially in our contemporary society.
Jim, greatly appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for giving us some insight. And it's obviously thank you for your service here in the country, and we wish you all the best with Enodo Global.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. And I hope people maybe glean something from this and can move forward and benefit from it in their lives.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. All the best.
All right, thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you. Jim Sisco, founder and president of risk advisory firm Enodo Global. As we mentioned, also great career, 23 years in the United States Navy and the Marine Corps, retiring as a lieutenant commander.
For more business news and analysis from Knowledge at Wharton, please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu.